Good afternoon and welcome back to Asgard, and welcome to a requested tutorial on how to set up the Mekanism fusion reactor. And I also had a request to do it in just one chunk, so we're going to be doing that. I do have a chunk border set up here, and you'll notice that the interior of this is all one chunk. So we're going to be setting it up down through these 3 floors, and you could make it a bit more denser and probably use like 2 floors or something. Just keep in mind that some of this stuff is solar based, so it is going to have to go on the top. So the stuff on this top floor is all going to be solar based things. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it. First off, we're going to be making our tritium fuel, and that's what we're going to focus down first. And to do so, we are going to need to make ourselves some salination towers. So we're going to start with 3 salination towers, and we're going to be using 2 of those to produce brine, and then the third one we'll have producing our fuel. So let's go with this, and we're going to go ahead and do full height. Now keep in mind you can make these as short as 3 high, but 18 is the max, and 18 is generally what I always go for, because getting the materials and stuff, if you have a quarry, it's not a big deal. And generally, if you're going to go very far into Mekanism, you're going to be setting up a good number of these towers. So we'll go ahead and take this up to 18 high. And when I say 18 high, this is 17 high. The 18th level is a little bit different. The bottom floor counts as the first one. Then you're going to have 16 levels set up just like this. These sizes aren't negotiable. You have to set it up like this. Just the height of the tower can be adjusted. And then the top floor, what you're going to do is set your thermal evaporation blocks around like that. And then you're going to put down your thermal evaporation controller in any of these 8 spots. So we'll set it like that. And then we're just going to put some advanced solar generators on top. So there we go. And so now we've got our 3 solar evaporation towers. Then you're going to want to get water into a couple of these. Now I usually set up 2 brine production towers and then 1 of the fuel towers. But you can kind of play around with it and see what you like. That's what I prefer. But we're going to go ahead and get water into these. And probably the best way in 1.7 is transfer nodes. So we'll go ahead and put down our fluid transfer nodes like that. And we'll give both of these some world interaction upgrades. You don't need 64. You get by with like 10. A stack upgrade, and then just some speed upgrades. Which, once again, you could probably get away with like 10 of these. But you are going to need a lot of water pumping through this. So I do suggest you try to push it as much as you can. And then what we'll do is we'll just put down our thermal evaporation valve. Just like that. And you'll notice here, if we look, it's producing brine at a fairly quick rate. Now you can speed this up. I'm not going to fully set this up right now. It's pretty standard. But what you can do is you can throw down some valves and put yourself down a fuel wood heater or 2. And what this does is this will cook up any kind of combustible fuel and produce heat with it. So what we could do is we could throw that in there, and then you'll just need some Mekanism heat cables, which are the thermodynamic cables. If you're curious which ones will move heat, and then you can just plug that in, and it's going to move heat for you, which will speed the heat up of this. And on the plus side, one reason I like to use the heaters is because it will allow your towers to run 24/7. Whereas solar, of course, when the sun goes down or it rains, it's going to stop running these towers. It's going to stop heating up, and your heat and thus your brine production is going to drop. Now there's also another heater that runs on electric. However, in my personal experience, it doesn't ever heat up as much as the fuel wood heater does. The fuel wood heater seems to heat up faster and do a better job. So if you have any kind of a charcoal setup, it's easy to use that. Then what we'll do is we'll give both of these a valve on the back, just like that. And we'll go ahead and give this one a valve. And we'll just run fluid from these. And then we're going to have this pull over into here. We'll say, insert. And so what's going to happen is the brine is going to go into this tower now and produce liquid lithium, which is what we're going to use for our fuel. And so that's going to start filling up, and then we can move on to the next step. So after that, we're going to want to go ahead and throw down another valve. We'll put our valve down on the front of this one that's producing our liquid lithium. And then we're going to want to put down ourselves just a couple rotary condensators. You don't have to go too crazy with these. And we're going to pump our liquid lithium into these. So we'll do something like this. And we'll use our configurator to shift right click and tell this to pull from there, and then it's going to pump into these. And now let's go ahead. Right now it's set to condensating. We're going to go ahead and change this over to deconcentrating. God, it's a terrible word to say. And then you're going to want to provide these rotary condensators with some sort of power. I'm just going to go with a creative energy cube, and we'll bring this stuff over. So these now have power. They're deconcentrating that liquid lithium into normal lithium. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pump that lithium out. So at this point it becomes a gas, so we're going to have to use gas pipes. So we're going to bring our lithium out and like right in here. And then what we're going to do is I would suggest you make a fair number of these. I tend to go with quite a few. And you're going to want these solar neutron activators. Now, these are just going to put on top. They do accept the gas from the bottom. And they don't require any power or anything because they're solar activated. So we'll just set them up like that. You'll notice it's taking the lithium and now producing our tritium, which is one of the major gases that, or fuels that we are going to need for our fusion reactor. So this one is good. We're producing it, and I'm happy with it. And if you want to pull this out, you are going to need to use your gas pipe and not your liquid pipe, because it is still in a gas form. And now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to set up our deuterium production. Now this isn't necessarily solar based, just like those. The main solar stuff is the towers and then these solar neutron activators. So those, you're going to have them on the top floor. The condensators and then the deuterium setup can be placed underground or whatever. But we're going to just set ourselves up a little area here, and we're going to put ourselves down some electric pumps. So now we've got some electric pumps set up, and what we're going to do is we're going to provide this with a bit of water, and there we go. So we have infinite water. Now you could set this up smaller. Honestly, you could do with just like 2 electric pumps with a small setup like this, but keep in mind that this stuff can be scaled and added on, and you can increase the power output of your reactor. The more fuel that you can provide it, the more power that it can create. So, alright, and once you got your electric pumps, what you're going to want to do is give these filter upgrades. These are all going to need filter upgrades. And what this does is this will allow the pump, instead of pumping up just standard water, it's going to pump up heavy water, which is what we want. So now, if we provide these with power, let's go ahead and set up our energy cube. And power on these is going to pump in from the front side there, and then your liquid's going to pump out of the top of it. But we'll go ahead and set this up to output power. And now if we take a look in here, it's going to say no fluid. That's just because it's building up in these mechanical pipes. You can see it in there. But that is heavy water. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up an electrolytic separator next. And we'll just put this... yeah, we'll put it like right there. And we'll plug up our water into like the back of this, I guess. And you'll notice it's going to start separating that heavy water down into deuterium and oxygen. So we're going to go ahead and tell it to dump the excess oxygen, because oxygen, we don't need it for this. Alright, so it's getting heavy water built up and producing our deuterium for us. So now that we have deuterium and tritium being produced, what we're going to do is we're going to set up ourselves a chemical infuser. And we'll go ahead and bring some power over to this. And then what we're going to do is let's bring our deuterium production over and plug it up. And keep in mind that while the heavy water and stuff is a fluid, that deuterium is going to be a gas. So all this stuff is going to be gases. And then we'll bring this over and plug that in. And you'll notice it's going to start combining that tritium and that deuterium together to create DT fuel. And DT fuel, you're not actually... I wouldn't pump the DT fuel directly into your reactor. You can. But the thing about DT fuel is it's going to immediately consume all of that DT fuel. It will increase the power output, but it's going to immediately consume it. So if you're only pumping in DT fuel, your reactor is going to die. It has to at least have tritium and deuterium coming in at a steady rate that can keep up with what it's consuming. And if it doesn't, it's going to shut down. You're going to have to restart it again, which, as you'll see, starting up your reactor is probably the worst part. So it does take a bit of energy to start it up, but once it's started up, it's going to run very well. So, and now the next thing that we're going to want to set up is our lasers. So I'm actually just going to set it up here. We could probably fit, honestly, if we scooched all this stuff back, we could honestly fit the entire setup in this one like flat chunk. So but I will probably come down just for the sake of the tutorial. Actually, we'll set it up right here. That'll be fine. So the lasers, the way these work is the more lasers that you have pumping in, the more energy that they're going to carry through an amplifier. So we're going to want to put down an energy cube to get started, because this is going to require power, and it's going to require a lot of it. And then what we'll do is we'll bring some cable up, and we'll set ourselves up a laser. Now you'll notice this is going to shoot a beam, and if we were to stand in front of it, you'll notice it catches us on fire, and it actually does some damage. Also, it's going to break through blocks. So if we give it a minute, it'll probably take forever to break through. There we go. But it will break through blocks. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set yourself up a laser amplifier. And you'll notice that it changes the direction of the beam. Now, what's nice about these laser amplifiers is they can accept lasers coming in from different directions and everything. And we're going to tell this to be enabled on low. Another thing you can do is you can actually just set it to require a high redstone signal, and that'll shut it off. But for this one, we're actually going to put a lever on it. I'll show you something we're going to do in a minute for activating the reactor. It's a little bit different. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to run these lasers up all over. You're going to want to get a decent number of these set up, honestly, because it is going to require a lot of power that's built up in order to start up your reactor. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But to build up that power, you're going to need to have these lasers set up. And you'll notice in here we can see that the stored rate is going up. So the more lasers that you have set up, the faster that that's going to build up. However, you'll notice that, well, technically this is out of that chunk, but you know, it could be shifted over and it wouldn't be a problem. So I'm not going to move it. But at best, you can have 4 lasers pumping into an amplifier that you're controlling with redstone. Now, technically, once we get this set up, this one doesn't have to be controlled. I'll show you why in just a second. But we've got our thermal evaporation block up there. So what we can do is we can connect up these amplifiers. This solid side is the one that's going to emit the laser bar. So you'll notice this laser is quite a bit bigger than those ones. That's because it's receiving 4 lasers and pumping into a laser amplifier. Now you could have another one. We'll go ahead and set this to disabled. You could have another one above it, so you can have up to 5 lasers per amplifier, and then you can have these amplifiers pump into more amplifiers, and so on, and you know, have quite a bit of lasers built up. So there we go. We've got a laser setup going now. This is a small one. You can expand this if you wanted to, but keep in mind that this is only going to be used to start up your reactor. It doesn't actually have anything to do with running it. So, you know, if it's set up well, you could start this up one time and never have to touch it again, unless you just wanted to shut off your reactor. And now at long last, it's time to actually set up the reactor itself. Alright, so when it comes to setting up your reactor, you're going to want to make sure and line this up with your laser amplifier, because you're going to want the laser amplifier to be able to hit the reactor, which we'll get into where it needs to hit and everything in just a minute. But what we're going to do is we're first going to do a star shape, just like this. This is going to be the bottom floor. So we've got our star shape, and then we're going to come up from that, and we're going to do 3 and 3 right there, 3 and 3. So we've got this sort of shape forming here. And then I actually didn't make this high enough. I was originally planning on putting this stuff on the bottom. Oh well. And then we're going to do a solid line that runs around like this. And on this solid line, we're going to actually want to break a couple of these, and we're going to want to use some reactor ports. So we're going to set these up on here, and you're going to need at least 3 of these across the entire block. And the reason why is you're going to want at least 2 for your inputs. You're going to need 1 for deuterium and 1 for tritium. And then if you want to pump in any DT fuel just to increase the energy output of it, you can do so, but you are going to need an additional reactor port, because like I said, it's going to require deuterium and tritium coming in at a constant rate. Now in addition, you're also going to want another reactor port, the third one that is mandatory to have, and that one is going to be for energy output. So we're going to put this one like right down here. Basically any reactor ports, you can put these on the center block here on this level, or any of these 3 interior blocks on this middle level. And then we're also going to want a laser focus matrix. Now this one is going to have to be pointed in where our laser amplifier is, so we're going to put it right there, because the laser amplifier has to be able to hit that with its laser to kickstart the reaction. And then if we want to, we can also use some reactor glass, so you can kind of spruce this up a little bit and see inside and all that good stuff. So we'll go ahead and remove that and do something like that. And then once you have all that set up, you're going to want to build the structure out basically the way you set up the first 2 floors, just kind of in reverse. So we're going to do like that. Then we'll go ahead and come above this and set up our, basically a carbon copy of our first floor that we set up there. Like that. The only exception is this top middle block, which just so happens to be under a cable. It needs to be a reactor controller. And whenever we put that on there, you saw the particle effects, that means that the multi-block does work. It's a form multi-block, and you know, we can use it and everything. So now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to actually pipe our fuels into this using our pressurized tubes. Now you don't have to necessarily use ultimate ones, but I like it. We'll bring our deuterium down like this. Just kind of wrap it around here and plug it in. And now if we take a look here, you can see that it's just filled up with deuterium. And then we're going to do the same over here with our tritium. We'll just bring it down like that. And so now if we take a look here at our fuels, it's filled up with tritium, it's filled up with deuterium, and everything is great. And now the last thing that we're going to need before we kickstart this is we're going to need a hull ROM. And once you get a hull ROM, it looks like it has durability and it's all drained out and everything. You can make this in the metallurgic infuser. It's fairly straightforward to set that up. But you're going to throw the hull ROM in your chemical infuser that I had you set up earlier. The reason that we needed this to make the DT fuel is because this hull ROM does require some DT fuel. So I just filled it up with some, and then what we can do is we can put this hull ROM into the top of our reactor, and that will enable us to kickstart it with a laser to actually start the fusion of, the whole fusion process and all of that. And let's go ahead and set up some place that can accept the energy that we're going to be creating. So we're just going to put an energy cube for right now for the sake of this video. Wrong cable there. And we'll plug that up. And let's go ahead and tell it to pull and push, just to be on the safe side. And now before you start up your reaction, you're going to need to let energy build up in these. So I'm going to have to let it build up to at least about halfway, I'd say. It's going to require at least 1 billion RF. So the more lasers that you have set up, the faster that you can generate that RF. So if you want to make a bigger setup, you can. And by the way, this is the distance of the lasers. If you were curious how far these would travel, that is the distance that's available. Alright, I went ahead and added a bunch more lasers. So all this stuff is pumping into this one and going into here and then into this. So it is building up a bit quicker. But we've got enough in there that we could start the reaction. So before we do that, now one thing I would suggest, if you're going to set this up in your world, I would suggest you do like speed upgrades, and you can also do energy upgrades. Not in the neutron activators, they don't take energy, so they can't accept that, but you can do speed and energy in your rotary concentrators and so on, to speed this whole process up, because you'll notice like these aren't really keeping up at the moment. Like the lithium production's not keeping up. So what we can do is we can grab ourselves a bunch of speed and energy upgrades and throw them into here. And we want to do this for all of our machines. The more that you can supply it with, honestly, that's, it's better. The more that you can give it, because it is going to eat through a lot of this fuel. And it's pretty much drained this, so the more heat that you can get in this, the better. So if you use that fuel wood heater and everything, that is going to speed that up. But basically, once you have your amount of fuel, before you start it up, you'll see there's some tabs in here. The reactor controller, this tab here is just going to tell you that the multi-block is formed, and it's where we put our hull ROM in. The heat is going to show you the heat of the plasma within the reactor, as well as the heat of the casing itself. So right now, there's nothing here because it hasn't heated up at all because we're not running it. But what this is going to tell you is basically, if you're using a steam reactor, which we're not going to get into that, this is basically just covering the fusion reactor side of things. But if you wanted to produce steam with this, you can, and you'd have to pump in water, so you need an additional port and everything. But that's mainly for use with the Mekanism turbine system. But this is going to mainly come into effect for steam production. The higher the heat is, the more energy that's going to be produced, but it's also going to eat through energy quicker and everything, or fuel quicker. You can also see your fuel rate, and you can set your injection rate. Now right now it's 0. We're going to change that in just a second. Then you can also look at your statistics. So air-cooled and water-cooled. So water-cooled is going to be the steam-based reactor. We're just going to be doing our air-cooled reactor. So we need a minimum injection rate of at least 2. So we'll go ahead and we'll set this to 2. And it's not going to actually start injecting anything until we activate the reactor. So we've got a bunch of energy in here. So what we can do is we can go ahead and just pulse this. And you'll see that it activates the reactor. It starts running. We get this really cool effect inside. And if we open this up, you'll see it ate our hull ROM to start up the reaction, and it is injecting the tritium and deuterium, and it's producing, if we pop down over here, you can see that this is producing RF at a fairly decent rate. If we take a look here at the statistics on it, you can see that the casing heat's dropping, because what's happened is, this is the internal buffer, by the way, for the RF, but you can see that the heat is slowly dropping over here, and it's dropping over here. That's because we gave it so much energy to start with that it produced a really high amount of heat and started consuming a lot of fuel, but the heat's going to slowly start dropping to match the heat level for our injection rate. So right now we're running the bare minimum injection rate. We can look in here and see that the ignition temperature needs to be at least 100 mK. Plasma temperature, casing temperature, that's the maximum. Now passive generation, it's going to produce 200,000 RF per tick is what we're producing at an injection rate of 2. Now if we bump that up, it's going to change. And if we wanted to bump this up to, say, a 4, we could do that, and you'll notice that now it's going to be 400,000 RF per tick. And these reactors, if you're producing enough fuel, you can get as much as, if I recall correctly, it's like 2 million RF per tick or something like that. It's absolutely just crazy power generation that you can produce with this. But you are going to have to scale this fuel out, and honestly, to produce that much RF, you're going to need more than one chunk worth of a setup to do that. But you'll notice that we're actually keeping up with an injection rate of 4 pretty decently. Now I will say that this is probably the bare minimum that I would set up, and I would fuel these with the fuel wood generator, because as of right now, of course this is only going to run during the day and it's going to shut down at night, and that does pose a problem with your solar neutron activators. So if you're running this, say, in the overworld, you are going to want a fairly large buffer of gas tanks to set up for your tritium. So generally, if you have RF tools, I would suggest you make an always day dimension, just because it makes your life 100 times easier. But if you have to set this up in the overworld or something, I would suggest you have a fairly large buffer, and you're going to need to scale that buffer with the higher injection rates and stuff, so that you have enough energy to run it through the night, because starting up this reactor is fairly costly in power. It's like 2 billion, but you'll notice that it's going to outproduce that power in no time. Yeah, see, we've already filled this energy cube, 51.2 million RF. So it really doesn't take long. Now right now it's pretty much just wasting the energy and just keeping this running. So you will want somewhere for all that energy to go. So I would suggest either a Mekanism multi-block energy storage or the draconium energy storage or something like that. You know, at least something with 1 trillion or more energy storage, especially if you make the larger scale reactors and everything. But yeah, so one other thing I want to tell you is with these lasers, you can set this up with a minimum. So we could say we want the minimum to be 1 billion RF, so 1 GRF. 2 billion is going to be the max, because that's field. But then what we could do is we could set this to on, and you'll notice it's not activating. That's because it's not going to activate until it reaches that threshold of 1 GRF. But anyway, that pretty much covers it. So if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to let me know, and I will definitely do my best to help you with that. And if you guys enjoyed the video, as always, be sure and hit that like button, and go ahead and subscribe if you're not already for more daily videos. I will say that there is some very good math and stuff online if you're wanting to look for like the ideal setup for, say, like an injection rate of 8 or injection rate of 10 or so on. If you guys have any questions or anything about that kind of stuff, I'll do my best to help you. But just keep in mind, always make sure that you're producing more fuel than you're using, because you don't want this thing stopping, because anytime that it stops, you're going to have to go back and turn it back on, and of course you have to make a new hull ROM and all that stuff. It's just easier if you can just keep this running constant, because it is, I mean, for the amount of energy that you use over here, especially if you have the energy upgrades and the speed upgrades and stuff, it's really, you don't consume that much energy, but this thing generates a ton of energy. It is a very, very good power source. It does take a bit to set up, a little bit expensive to set up, but once you do, you're honestly set on energy. You know, you can keep scaling it and everything. But yeah, so anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. And as always, until next time, do take care, stay safe, and I hope to see you guys next time.